Hello and welcome to the Audio Epics podcast. I'm Domien.
And I'm Eileen.
And welcome to our 5K subscribers podcast. We promised to do this podcast if we reached 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. And since we assume our biggest audience is, wandering there, this is a big deal.
Yes, it is. There's a lot of channels out there, weird stuff you couldn't imagine with far more subscribers. Amazing creators like Alan Becker with his Stick Eyes adventures and hamster adventures, where someone creates awesome mazes for his hamsters with a storyline, sound effects and music. So there's really a lot of awesome stuff out there. Sadly enough, there is a lot of junk too with lots of subscribers.
And you mean that's us, or no? The junk stuff mainly seems directed at kids. They tend to be a little bit less critical of such things. For example, the stuff we've seen. People just crushing toys for fun, or kids ravaging their home with condiments and cereal and shaving foam and stuff.
Yeah, I had nightmares about that. It was awful. But since it takes more time to create than to destroy, we think 5K subscribers is pretty awesome. By the time we record this, it's actually more. Was it 5,066 or something?
Yeah, it's over 5,060 at this point. And by the time this airs, it might be 5,070. I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. It really means a lot to us.
Yeah, first we wanted to do a little recap of our channel stats. We started our YouTube channel somewhere in 2014, I guess.
Yeah, and the first video we uploaded, unfortunately, is no longer visible. That was the first episode of the Witch Hunter Chronicles on April 20th. We shared that in 9 episodes, and it was about 4.5 hours long in total. This was the first version of Witch Hunter, a much shorter audio drama, and, we did win an Ogle Award with it, but as you know, I have issues with it, but a small minority of our fans actually prefer it, the insane ones, because I hate it with the power of 1,000 hurricanes, and therefore it is no longer available online. However, my lovely wife did persuade me to put it online again on Patreon for our most loyal supporters who aren't going to run away screaming because of this awful...
Or maybe they will. I guess we'll find out.
So at the moment, ourselves excluded, it's still available to about 20 people.
The first visible video on our channel is the introduction video to Witch Hunter the Dramatized Audiobook, which we posted on my birthday in 2014 to inform our Indiegogo supporters about what we had in store for this longer and more epic version of the story they already loved. The Indiegogo videos we created are somewhat embarrassing.
Yeah, I remember
They
those.
actually show our faces, and one we're in the woods and the other one we're at home, and it's really embarrassing. They have served their purpose, and so they're no longer visible either.
Yeah. When we saw those again a while ago, we thought this doesn't need to be on here anymore. So
Yeah, I was actually
just sweep it under the rug.
thinking about making them visible again for our patrons, but then I was like, nah.
No, I can see why. But then we published Witch Hunter, the dramatized audiobook, on February 5th, 2016, and from there our channel started growing gradually.
That first episode now has, last time I checked, 149,310 views. That's a lot.
Actually, it was 194,310 views.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So it's getting close to 200,000. And after Witch Hunter, we published The Will of the Woods. That was June the 1st in 2016. That was the English... The Will of the Woods, actually, maybe some people don't know this, but originally it had a different title because it was the English remake of De Wezens van het Woud, which was only made available on CD in Flemish.
CDs? Wow,
CD,
that's
yeah.
ancient. Whoa.
Little shiny discs. We had translated and remade it years before we got married and became parents, but it was only available as a podcast then. Publishing Witch Hunter on YouTube made us realize we could do the same for The Will of the Woods, and so we did.
Of course, since we're easily embarrassed, we had to publish a remastered edition of that later, on February 28th, 2018.
Yeah, the thing is, the remastered edition was really because I felt that the audio was a bit too quiet. And for that reason, I wanted to re-release it so that it worked better to listen to on the internet.
Yeah. So if you still want to listen to The Will of the Woods, make sure you have the remastered edition, because the first edition is still on our channel.
Yep. And in the meantime, we started publishing episodes of the Audio Epics podcast, which started out as a podcast in which we answered the questions about our stories that we got in the comments section. We shared our plans for the future that admittedly didn't always come through. We speculated in that podcast. We even did unboxing videos.
Right. With a little Ronan.
Yeah, for the keyboard. And we shared news.
Yeah, and the CD versions of...
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, the unboxing for the CDs of Witch Hunter. And yeah, that was cool. It was fun.
In the beginning, the podcast was all over the place. So we decided to rename it the Storytelling Podcast and create more structured episodes about storytelling topics we found interesting.
Yeah, like vampires in storytelling, storytelling in tabletop RPGs, prophecy and destiny, humor, titles, names, prequels, sequels, per-sequels, remember?
Yeah, right.
Adaptations, remakes, reboots, reimaginings, the hero, the sidekick, originality in storytelling, even fear, common mistakes, you name it.
Yeah, and like always, we have a secret list of future episodes that we are still going to create and publish. When we're exhausted after a hard day of work and kids, sometimes we prefer to record a storytelling podcast to binging yet another series. Also...
Yeah, it's not like we do that much, right? I mean, we're not really series bingers.
No, but there are a lot of times when we're just really tired and just our minds are blank.
Yes.
We need the blankness to be filled.
Yes.
But then we still have... usually we have energy left to record a podcast, especially if we have tea.
By the way, we're having white tea tonight. And
it's my favorite brand. It's from Tea Masters, I believe.
Yes. It's loose leaf tea. It's got vanilla. White tea and vanilla.
But also not strawberry, raspberry.
Oh yeah, vanilla
raspberry vanilla. Yes. Yeah, it's awesome.
I always call it the white tea of Minas Tirith.
Yeah, we do, and it's kick-ass.
Maybe I should call it the white tea of Minas Tirith.
Whoa, that's so deep.
Yeah. I'll just pour us a cup while you continue talking.
See, that's why we love doing these podcasts when we're really tired, because if you like to hear us ramble on and say silly things, then that's the best time to do it.
I find it actually energizing to do this.
True, yeah. That's another reason to do it. So, what was I saying? It structured our thoughts and it inspires us. And actually, I found out that a small minority of our listeners are mostly or even only interested in our ramblings about well-known stories.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's incredible.
That puzzles me.
It's incredible, but it's true. Those will not be disappointed in the future because we have many more episodes up our sleeves to post in anticipation of a new story. Although we'd prefer posting more stories and less podcasts in the future, if at all possible.
Of course, before we published The Beast of the Western Wilds... That was the dog? Yes, that was the dog outside.
Okay, I thought it came from your stomach. That was scary.
Of course, we also published The Beast of the Western Wilds and The Treasure of Boneyard Bay, are two prequels to Witch Hunter. But after Boneyard Bay and while we were doing the storytelling podcast, the Corona fuss started. And so we launched...
Before we launched Boneyard Bay.
Yeah, before we did Boneyard Bay, yeah. But after we did Beast and while we were doing the storytelling podcast, that whole thing started. And so we launched a couple of silly episodes to get our minds off all the negativity in the press and stuff. And those became the quarantine questions and lockdown dilemmas, which for me were some of the most fun episodes.
Yeah. The titles speak for themselves. We gave each other ridiculous dilemmas and silly questions. And we experimented, right, with preparing the answers, not preparing the answers, giving them to each other the minute we started recording, or simply improvising, and that was really great fun.
And then last but not least, we have some lore videos about our setting, which is called Ruda, by the way. That's the world in which Witch Hunter is set. You know, and that's the setting of Witch Hunter, the Beast of the Western Wilds, Treasure of Boneyard Bay. But those lore videos can be found on Patreon. They're for our subscribers.
So this was a recap about all the visible and invisible videos posted on our channel over the years that have led up to 5,000 plus subscribers today. We want to thank you all so much. I announced this on social media since Domine is allergic to social media, and I launched a poll to know what we could do in return of your loyalty.
Yeah, I'm allergic. The last time I tried Facebook, I got all these red dots all over my skin, so I had to quit.
And I connected the dots, and it turned out to be a great piece of artwork, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can visit it in the museum now.
In Brussels.
Okay, let's talk about the poll. Because some of us, some of you wanted us to do a live stream, but that was only 10%. Luckily, because to be honest, we've never done that, and we wouldn't know how, really. So we would have done it if that's what most of you would have preferred, but we were kind of glad that it wasn't too popular.
We might try a live stream for our patrons first, but we're both introverts who need to gather our breath and strength with every phone call, so a live stream is a really big deal for us. The personal thank you letter on social media was an option I put there because I like poll options to be uneven. That's kind of a quirk of mine. And I could only think of 4 interesting ones, so I added something no one would pick.
So, well, that's honest. Most of you, no less than 46%, wanted us to create a short 5,000-word audiobook. And yes, we are working on that.
And you're the first to know, but it's going to be a short story set in the world of Ruda again, with Ludlov as a main character, and it will be a very dark and disturbing story. The idea actually came to me around Halloween, and I've written about 3/3 now. It's the ending that proves most challenging, since it's so dark and disturbing, and we actually want our main characters to survive, because, we need more.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to kill off Ludlov in a holiday special, basically.
Yeah. And me, I'm not one for brevity, so don't shoot me if it turns out to be more than 5,000 words.
I don't think anyone's gonna keep count anyway, but I'm pretty sure that people will actually appreciate it if it turns out a bit long.
Word will keep count.
Word does keep count, yes. We're also still working on the script of The Wizard of the Woods in the meanwhile. But when we checked out the poll results, we also noticed that 22% of you wanted us to create another storytelling podcast special, like last year's holiday special. And 22% wanted us to create a behind-the-scenes video where we talk about ourselves. So, we had to figure out a way to please as many people as possible.
Yeah, as the crowd pleasers we are.
And so we came up with this podcast. In this 5K subscriber podcast, we've talked about our YouTube channel, but we'll also address some personal questions and questions regarding audio epics that you've sent to us here on YouTube, other socials, and even in the mail.
In addition to this podcast, we will still have a holiday special in store for 2022, and of course the short story, and the making of the Treasure of Boneyard Bay. So there is a lot of new content coming up.
Yes, and all of that, of course, just in anticipation of The Wizard of the Woods, which is going to be our next major release, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with listener questions, and we'll both be answering these questions as honestly as we can.
This we can do very honestly.
Yeah, pretty sure.
If we ever get a bit more confident, we definitely intend to make videos of our podcasts, and actually make use of the visual options we have on YouTube. But for now, we decided not to, since I don't know about Domine, but I'd probably get a heart attack. I like to prepare things before I say something too, so because I can sound incredibly stupid, especially unprepared. But we will try to make the YouTube video more visual by adding pictures. That's fun,
just
right?
random pictures of puppies and...
Not random.
No? Okay. Alphabetically ordered pictures of puppies and kittens. Oh, okay.
What's with the puppies?
I don't know. People like looking at cute puppies.
Yeah, so the first question is from Mahir, from Denmark. Mahir, I think, yeah. I hope I pronounced this correctly. He asks, what made you start doing audio dramas? Where do you get the inspiration from? The Witch Hunter lore looks quite vast.
Okay, so I guess that's two questions. As to the origins of the audio dramas, I guess my first real influence there was my grandfather, who was big into audio. And he used to make cassette tapes for me when I was a kid, where he would tell ghost stories with classical music, like the Danse Macabre by Camille Saint-Saëns. Look it up. It's an amazing piece of music.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And he would use that in the background, and then he would, jingle his keys, and that would be like the bones of the skeletons dancing and stuff like that.
Didn't he repair radios for...
during World War II, he repaired radios for the resistance, actually. So, yeah.
Wow.
And then another influence when I was a kid were also cassette tapes that we had. They were books containing fairy tales, beautifully illustrated, but they came with these cassette tapes where you could listen while the stories were being read to you, and every once in a while you would hear bing, and that meant you had to turn the page to continue reading. So yeah, I loved those. They had sound effects, but it was very, very subtle. Like, if there was a scene during a storm, you would hear some vague rain in the background while the narrator was speaking. There was a little bit of music in the beginning and at the end. So it was all very minimalistic, but that gave it a certain charm.
Right, like the one with the ghost where you had the screaming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then when I was, I think, 14 years old, my dad took me on a trip to the UK. And that's where I discovered the cassette tapes with the BBC radio adaptation of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Those are awesome.
And I was already a big fan of the books. And I thought, wow, they did this in audio, so, brought to life with voice actors and music. I want to listen to this. And I listened to it when I was on holiday in an environment that was really pretty similar to the Shire, actually. It was in the south of Belgium, near France. And it was a very old house with a creaky wooden floor, and
close to the woods.
Yes. So it felt like you were in Middle Earth even when you were listening to it. And it was, I think it was a formative experience for me. And yeah, that really made me want to create audio drama myself. And yeah, I at first I did that with a friend Olivier. At first we just sort of did silly stuff, sketches and stuff, stupid voices, and really just ridiculous things, jokey stuff, really.
In Flemish, right?
Yeah, in Flemish on cassette tape. We did a Star Wars parody. I remember that. That was kind of fun. But then, yeah, after a while, we wanted to do, tell good stories and actually write a script. And so we started doing that. And yeah, we kept on doing it, and it just grew and grew, and we learned and improved and learned about editing and all that stuff just along the way, very naturally. And yeah, for the longest time, we just used music from movies to put in the audio stories, and we just made cassettes and CDs, just for ourselves and some friends. But then, by the time we came to De Wezens van het Woud, we really wanted to reach more people and make it legal. So we had to have our own music. We really wanted to publish it on CD. And that's when we got in touch with Peter van Riet. And he's been doing music for us ever since. And that was an amazing experience, the first time we really had our own music.
Yeah, the music is a wonderful part of the Will of the Woods. It makes it what it is now. It's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was the first part of that question, the origins of the audio dramas. And as for inspiration, inspiration, of course, I think, like for most people, comes from movies, books, games, places where we've been. But for me, a huge part of it is film music. I'm a huge film music nerd, and or I should say a fan. And I've been listening to John Williams, James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, all of these composers ever since I was little. And a big part of where inspiration comes from for me is just listening to the music and letting the music put stories and places and characters and ideas into my mind. As for the lore, the Witch Hunter lore, for me, I guess it just kind of comes to me. I think some of it comes from history, mythology, probably lore from other settings like Warhammer and what have you. Or maybe just a lot of the time they're just stories that I make up just because I need a reason for why, for example, why do these people live over there so I need to sort of imagine a story that explains how those people got there, or
Yeah, like why gypsies turned out in the north.
Yeah, exactly, which is explained in Boneyard Bay.
Yeah.
But to keep track of it all, I made, I think 2 years ago, I started very, very slowly working on a World Anvil. World Anvil is a website where you can sort of make something, I guess, like a wiki of your own fantasy setting. It's really specifically made for that, and that makes it really cool. You can have world maps on there. You can have timelines of the history. It even supports like D&D statistics and stuff like that. You can definitely use it for that purpose as well if you're a DM. But yeah, I made one for Witch Hunter, but I haven't made it public.
As for me, I think my answers will probably have a lot of overlap with Domeen's. I always loved those cassette tapes from Lecturama and Deltas when I was young. They mostly had fairy tales, which I loved. My favorite one was Rapunzel. I devoured books as a child, and I listened to these tapes. They transported me into another world, and they allowed me to escape everyday reality. I met Domeen online when I was in my 20s. I think. He went to the same university, and he also studied Germanic languages, English and Dutch, but he had classes in another block. So he knew what I looked like in real life, but I had only seen him on pictures. And he couldn't stop bragging about this audio drama he made. It was the Flemish version of The Will of the Woods then, the Wezens van het Woud. And I had become a bit cynical at that time, and I was no longer easily impressed, so I didn't pay much attention to it at first. But then I got curious and I decided to buy it, the CD, from him. Also, I had heard about Dominine's hometown, but I had never visited it and had never met him in real life, so I went down there and I bought the CD, which turned out to be the first of a series of dates that actually got us together.
Well, yeah, we didn't intend it to be a date.
No, it was more like an accidental date.
It was an accidental date. Yeah.
It was your dog who put us up to it. So, I remember I wanted to listen to the first part that night in bed with headphones.
That's the way to do it. Yeah.
So I did. It was about 2 hours and a half, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I was planning to listen to the rest the next day, but I was completely hooked. So, it was so emotional at the end of the story. I was so emotional. And I was like, who is that guy? And that's when I actually fell in love twice. I fell in love with you, Domine, and with the medium of audio drama. I thought it was a great way to have people experience a story like a movie, but with your eyes closed. And since I got one of the CD copies and was really impressed with both the quality of the story and the audio, and as the first edition had sold out, I wanted to invest in a second edition. And we still have many of those CDs stored everywhere in the house, in every...
Yeah, every once in a while we give some away. But...
Yeah, true. and in the meantime, we put the Flemish version on YouTube as well, so...
Yeah, and it's got about like 90 views or something. It's really...
Is it 19 already?
90.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not very high.
I thought it was 5 or something. I love the possibilities of audio, so I made Domine an audio story called King Damien for his birthday.
Yeah, I remember that. That's when I fell in love.
And later another one for New Year's. They were not at all professional, but he thought they were cute. I used a pink digital recorder for that I had purchased before to conduct a couple of interviews for a Dutch class. And for the Witch Hunter setting, I loved that from the moment I listened to Witch Hunter. I could really imagine what it looked like, and I loved the atmosphere above all. I later came up with the name of Ruda, and Domine thought it had a good ring to it, so... Now I'm happy to be able to contribute to this world. And I think our last story, The Treasure of Boneyard Bay, we've been able to share more of this world than just the areas near Seven Peaks, right?
Yeah.
That's also what we'd like to do more in the future with the sequels.
Yeah, we want to expand on the world.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that every new story is going to be like this huge quest where they travel all over all over the place. But, you know... we will see other areas besides just...
Yeah, as the stakes grow bigger.
Yeah.
We will meet more important people, of course, and get to more important settings, I guess.
So, yeah, how long was that for the first question?
Maybe the first question will be the longest.
Yeah, probably. Okay, second question comes from Mark C.
There's 11, right?
In total, 11 questions, yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's move on.
And he asks, what are your favorite writers or favorite books? And while you answer that, I'll have some tea.
Okay, that's actually a great question. Domine is one of my favorite writers. I have to answer that because he will hit me if I don't. No, that's not true. As you might have deduced from my answers to the former questions, I really love his writing style. As a child, I loved creepy stuff. I loved Roald Dahl, R.L. Stine, and I started reading Stephen King pretty early. I was also a big fan of Paul van Loon. He's a Dutch writer who wrote an entire series about a bunch of school kids traveling in a creepy bus with an undead writer telling horror stories and a skeleton behind the wheel.
Yeah, it's as cool as it sounds.
It is really cool. And I can't wait, actually, to introduce those books to Ronan. as he's been pretty obsessed with skeletons for months now, and he's starting to read. So he got into Halloween mode in July, and he still didn't get out of it.
Yeah.
He's playing things like Skeleton Santa now. So, so I loved that and devoured many Stephen King's. Then discovered the Harry Potter series, which I loved. I've been obsessed with YA for a while, especially Susan Collins' The Hunger Games. At university, I loved Lewis' The Chronicles of Narnia, which I started reading after I discovered the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And since I wrote my bachelor paper on those, I read many of Lewis' non-fiction books as well. Through the movies, I discovered The Lord of the Rings and fell in love with that story. It's still my favorite now. And I love the BBC radio drama versions of Tolkien and Lewis's masterpieces. As for now, I simply don't have the time to read anymore, nor the skill. I couldn't wait to learn how to read, and I taught myself at the age of 5. I devoured books then, and now it's been years since I finished a novel. And I think I tried everything, rereading old novels, reading the books of YA movies. So
novelizations.
Yeah, novelizations. The books from the movies that I watched. So
the original books that the movies were based on.
So I already knew what the story was about. I would get more easily into it or something. But the only thing I managed to read nowadays are our oldest son's first reader books that, according to him, are super boring, and I completely agree. He does love the books from Dr. Seuss, though, and I do too. So I guess I'm starting again as a level 1 reader, and hopefully my reading skills will grow again along with him. I also think I should cut my screen time for that. But that's entirely a different discussion, worthy of another podcast, probably.
Yeah, you know what? I really understand what you're saying because, I loved books as a kid, but I have to admit, I went through a very long period where I had a lot of trouble. I also, as a kid, I could read before I went to school. I loved reading, but everyone thought I was going to be the big reader, I guess. But for some reason, at some point, maybe ADD, ADHD, I don't know, but I lost the
focus.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. And for a long time, I didn't read all that much. Video games have a lot to do with that as well. I played a lot of video games, which kept me away from books, unfortunately. But actually, I think I was in my 30s when the reading bug bit me again.
I think it was here when we moved here. I think 5 years ago or something. You started to really get into reading
it again. Was, I guess, when I didn't really have as much time for video games anymore.
Oh, and when you took the train.
Yeah, and for me, how I got back into it was by reading the Chronicles of Narnia, because they're so short and easy to get into. And that made it, it was baby steps, as you say, and it made it easier for me to get into it. And from there, I made my way back to, the Brandon Sanderson and big epic fantasies, But yeah, having to go on that commute by train to Brussels, that really helped for me. And I made sure that I took the time to read. Then I see a lot of people on the train watching TV shows on their tablets and phones, and I think, no, I really don't want to do that. This is the place where I can read. So this is where I'm going to read.
And you wrote a big part of.
I wrote most of The Treasure of Boneyard Bay on the train. At first, I wanted to read because I felt like I had to, because, I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer, I have to read. Now I don't think about that anymore. Now I really read because I genuinely love it. And I love it more than any other form of story. I love it more than movies. I love it certainly more than video games.
So there must be something like a reading muscle that you train. It has to become a habit. I know as a child,
You know what I think it is?
I constantly
I discovered the right books for me again.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And I started by rereading my favorite ones from when I was young, which was, Tolkien and Lewis. So the answer, my favorite writer, of course, number one is Tolkien. And yes, that's how you pronounce his name. Tolkien. It's not Tolkien. It's Tolkien.
Oh, you're such a snob.
No, it's true. But it's true. And and Lewis, of course, especially
our listeners pronounce it right. I'm sure of it.
Especially Voyage of the Dawn Treader and the Silver Chair. Those are my favorite Narnia books, because I think they're really atmospheric.
Yeah, love those. They
and
were
I also
kind of an inspiration.
I also love the Screwtape Letters, but that's more because of I think it's got such amazing insights, that book. But it's hardly fiction. It's sort of between philosophy and fiction. I don't know.
And it has an audio version that's
the audio version with Andy Serkis is amazing. It's an amazing production. Yeah, so by rereading, first Narnia, then The Hobbit, then The Lord of the Rings, then The Silmarillion, that's how I got back into reading. Dune was another favorite of mine.
Oh yeah. Love Dune.
Now my favorite writer currently is John Gwynne. He's a British author of heroic epic fantasy, and I think he's actually way better than Brandon Sanderson. And I kind of really hope for him that he's gonna become more and more successful and become more of a household name, because,
Yeah, and you really loved Sanderson.
Yeah, and I loved Sanderson at first, but after a while it became too...
Cerebral?
Yeah, that's exactly the right word. Too cerebral for me. There was too much hard magic, it became too sciencey, and too many meetings. People sitting around in meetings. The first book, Way of Kings, it had such a vast epic scope. And by the third book, it was about people sitting around in meetings and discussing how are we going to solve this problem.
Okay.
I thought.
I never got to the third book.
But other favorites of mine are Raymond Feist, his Riftwar trilogy, which is also a very, exciting fantasy trilogy. And Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, especially their first 6 Dragonlance books. Those are probably the most fun you could possibly have with a book.
Wow. You should start a book nerd channel.
Oh, there are plenty of those.
Yeah, we already have Mike's book reviews.
Yeah, I really like Mike's book reviews. He's fun. He just comes across as a nice guy. But yeah, watching those YouTube book channels also helps you to get more excited about it.
It's inspiring,
reading.
Yeah, it is.
One day, I'm working my way up to that. One day I want to try to read the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is a 10-part epic fantasy series, and it's got this reputation of being, I guess, like in video games, you have Dark Souls, which has a reputation of being like really hard but really excellent, and Malazan has that reputation of being very difficult, very complicated, but really, really very epic and very exciting books.
They said that about Dune too, but I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, when I first read Dune, at first I had no idea what was happening. There were so many terms and names that were just, mentioned casually as if you were supposed to already know all of that stuff.
That's probably the idea.
Yeah, I think so, because that makes it so immersive. It makes it feel like this is a real universe.
Yeah, and the fact that the main character is going to traveling to a new setting, and he doesn't know a lot about it, that makes it more credible too. That
yeah, that's true.
He has the same learning curve, basically.
That's true. And I thought, by the way, that the the movie by Denis Villeneuve with Timothée Chalamet was one of the best adaptations of a book I've ever seen.
It was. The only problem with it is that we have to wait such a long time for part 2.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
Yeah. But that was fantastic. Just between brackets, just want to mention that. Okay, and then we got another question from Mark C. And it is, do you get writer's block? And how do you tackle it? So I'll wait until Eline's got her cup of tea.
Common question, yeah. No, never. I'm a well of ideas, actually. But that's a problem, too. The problem is turning them into actual stories. Since I have so many ideas that just keep piling up, that I always get excited about something new and lose interest in the former. And that's where Domine comes in. Working on these stories together solves a part of that problem. We decided on the next story, and we stick with that. And that's a must for me to get creative. I now get to spawn ideas, and I don't have to worry about grammar or dialogue too much. And he doesn't need to worry that much about plot development. So actually, we kind of help each other out this way.
So my answer to the question, do you get writer's block, is yes. And how do you tackle it? I let Eline handle it. Well, the truth is, it's like Eline said, she is an eternal wellspring of ideas. I'm more like a slow trickle of ideas once in a while. But what I love most is setting a scene, bringing characters to life, dialogue, descriptions, setting the pacing.
Yeah, but you do pick up on that quite easily. Like when I briefly outline a character, you really get it, and the dialogue really flows from that.
Yeah, I guess in the case of Boneyard Bay, that's also because we talked about the characters so much in advance before we put a single letter on the page that I guess they already were people by the time we started writing.
Yeah, true, yeah.
So you see all that sitting around and talking, it's not wasting time, it is productive.
Yeah, we keep telling ourselves that. The next question was asked by Dragan Sirik, and he's an artist. He supports us as a captain of the guard on Patreon. He made a beautiful drawing inspired by the beast of the Western Wilds that has Ludlov in it. And this time we don't see his naked chest. He's more like a solid Ludlov walking in the woods.
Oh yeah, you mean like that one piece of art? Yeah, the one with the six-pack. Yeah.
Yeah, which is loved by many.
It is a great piece.
It is a great piece.
Actually, a little bit of trivia about that. That was made a long time ago. I think back in 2007. I think my friend Olivier had discovered the guy who drew that on the internet. And he was just a beginning artist. And later on, we found out that he did artwork for Dungeons and Dragons, for Wizards of the Coast.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're such lucky bastards. And also,
I don't think he's free anymore.
With Dragan, he made a beautiful drawing. We absolutely love it. And his question is, do you use visual references for inspiration when writing fantasy art images? And if yes, which are your favorite artists or art pieces?
Yes, absolutely. I remember quite well for The Will of the Woods, well, back then, De Wezens van het Woud. It was Brian Froud and Alan Lee. In particular, a book that they made together on fairies. And these two illustrators just got together to make a book about fairies, and they drew all kinds of different species of fairies and where they lived and how they lived. what have you, pixies and brownies, and
Do we own it, the book?
No, a friend of mine, Laura had it, and I was just she showed it to me, and I was looking at it, and I that inspired me just looking at that book.
We could use it again for the sequel.
Yeah, perhaps if we can find it somewhere. Brian Froud and Alan Lee, and of course both of them also did artwork, concept art for some of my favorite movies, The Lord of the Rings, Alan Lee for The Lord of the Rings, and Brian Froud for The Dark Crystal.
Oh.
For Witch Hunter, a lot of it came from the actual buildings in Antwerp, but also, of course, artwork from the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay books, especially the stuff by John Blanche. John Blanche is a guy who has this really unique technique in how he makes his artwork. It's kind of a very rough style, which makes it stand out from the more, the more precise illustrations that you usually get for these game books and stuff. And my favorite artist is probably Anton Pieck.
Well, I've always loved the visual arts too, especially Anton Pieck, as a huge fan of the Efteling theme park in the Netherlands. And through the extended editions of the Lord of the Rings movies, I discovered Alan Lee and John Howe, whose artwork I really love. Those are my absolute favorites. And I've always had a thing for Monet as well. But recently, while forcing myself to do social media, I discovered how inspiring artistic projects can be. There is so much talent out there, and they don't even have to be famous people. I follow inspiring miniature painters on Instagram, for example. Lego landscape builders, artists that use pencils and all sorts of paint, or digital artists. Even the decors of the hamster maze guy on YouTube are very inspiring.
There's some really cool stuff there.
Yeah. And hey, even if you consider yourself an amateur artist, why don't you share your artwork with us? It might inspire our next story.
Yes, but AI doesn't count.
AI doesn't count, because no, just no. Oh, and I forgot to mention, during the lockdowns, we discovered Bob Ross, and I don't know what inspired us most, his works or the man himself. He was so charismatic.
I think it's the guy.
We completely loved him.
Just watching, it's unbelievably soothing, just watching his shows.
It was mesmerizing.
Was it? The joy of painting.
Yeah.
It's so just relaxing to listen to his voice. And
even solve my coffee rush watching an episode like that. So, yeah, I really love Bob Ross.
Yeah, let's put a happy little tree in there. Our next question comes from Peter Strandkrone. Oh, yeah, Peter Strandkrone sent us a whole bunch of questions. So here's the first one. He's a patron of ours. He's not just any patron. He's a saint, which is, one of the highest tiers in our Patreon
system thingy. Yeah.
If you've listened to The Treasure of Boneyard Bay, you will have noticed we used his name in our setting, because that's one of the rewards you get for being a Patreon supporter.
For being a saint. Yeah.
For being a saint, yeah. And the first question from Peter Strandkrone is, have you always known you wanted to become a writer, or did it just turn out that way?
That's a cool question. I guess for me, I've always felt like a writer. I don't know how to explain it. I was always observing and describing things in my head, digging into people's minds. I even had a little narrator in my head who told me my life when I was bored. Like when I was going to the park or something, or something exciting happened. There was a voiceover.
Like she was looking at the ducks.
Yeah, I know they laugh about that in romantic comedies.
Yeah,
but I actually had one. So call me crazy. When I was 6, I wanted to become a writer, first and foremost. And at first, I drew comics. Mostly treasure adventures about mice, or people who had at least shrunk to the size of mice. My first novel was called Alone in the World, and when I showed it to my mom, she told me that book already had been written by Hector Malot. I later read it, but it was not at all what I had intended to write. Mine was actually about a very Kevin in Home Alone kind of little guy who actually woke up one day and the world was empty. All houses were abandoned. There was no one there. So that was the concept.
Isn't that sort of the concept of that zombie movie, 28 Days Later?
No idea. Never watched it. But I got demotivated by that. So the fact, like, yeah, it exists already. And then I became an avid reader instead. But I couldn't quite control the urge to write, so as a teenager I wrote a fantasy story, Morgan Blue and the Secret of the Blue Fire. It sounds really cheesy, which it was. I've translated
it. That name Morgan Blue really brings back a lot of memories for me.
Yeah, that was my nickname.
Yeah.
And since then I've translated and rewritten it about 5 times, but I was so insecure I never had anyone read it. And I probably passed university because of the huge amount of papers we had to write, because I sucked at oral exams.
Actually, it's weird because...
You get it.
I always preferred exams over papers. I hated having to write papers.
Oh no, I hated
exams. Please just give me an exam so then I'm, then it's just over and done with. But papers, you just had to keep on working on that.
Yeah, but you can lock yourself up, and with exams you have to face actual people who are much smarter and more arrogant than you. And
yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So I'm a behind the scenes girl, I guess, and I did have 2 professors who encouraged me to write. So I started writing more often as I grew older. And I had an article published in a movie magazine about the movie The New World, which was fun. And that was based on a paper my professor liked. And I also wrote some essays and columns for a local silly paper, a very silly one. And some short stories when I was at university. And actually there was a friend of my parents, and he was the only one who got to read them and who was supporting me.
Supporting you? How?
Like encouraging me, like
okay.
You should do something with this, or you should write more stories, or how does the story move on? He asked questions like, what does this main character think? Why does he do this?
Right, yeah.
And I've always kept a diary, and writing just keeps me sane, whether or not it gets published. So that's that.
Right, yeah. So, yes, you always were a writer and you never really quit being a writer. I especially used to draw comic books as a kid. Now, looking back on that...
Me too.
My idea was that I would have several series of comic books. So I had one about a professor and his talking parrot. I had one about a knight. I had one about a robot in the future. I had one about a pirate.
Okay.
So in different characters, just basically, I guess they were all based on the different sorts of Lego that you had at the time. I just realized now that I'm saying it.
That's awesome.
I had no idea at the time, but when I look back on it, I think that was my main inspiration for the comic books that I drew as a kid. And then later on, I wrote out stories and I glued the pages together and then called it a book. And it's funny because that's exactly what our oldest son is doing now.
Right. And he does get inspiration from his toys too,
yeah,
and from television. Yeah.
So I guess I always knew I wanted to write, but I didn't always know what. Or at one point I thought at one point I became a big movie fan, and I was especially interested in how movies are written and screenplays, and so that's when we did more audio drama. So I wrote scripts more than prose, like The Will of the Woods. But ever since I returned to prose, I do like how you can be really descriptive in that. So there.
So there. Question 6 is also one by Peter Strandkrone. He asked us the following. Do you have beautiful landscapes and forests around where you live, which can give you inspiration to your writings?
Well, unlike Wallonia in the south of Belgium, Flanders, which is the northern half where we live, is an area crammed full of buildings. One town just blends into the next without anything to separate them. Like in the UK, for example, you might have a town, and then you leave the town and you drive through fields and past woods, and then you come to the next town. Here, it's not like that. Here, everything is basically one big town.
Town.
Yeah, it's all buildings.
A chain of towns.
Yeah. So how do you know you're in one town and not in another one? You just have to look at the signs.
The signs.
Yeah, that's the only way you know. But we do have some places that have some pretty natural landscapes. And we happen to live in a fairly rural area by Flemish standards. It's a little village, a quiet street. We don't live in a house; we live in an apartment. But it's a quiet rural area, and there's room to nice places here to go for a walk and woods and fields. It's small, but it's something. And by our standards, it's pretty good. But by American standards, it's pretty pathetic. I mean, if you have Yellowstone or Yosemite, then yeah, what we have is just a little park. But it's nice.
Yeah, we live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a small town, and it is part of a bigger city, so it is less crowded, and that's good. So there's a tiny bit of forest next to our son's school. There is also a beautiful park around the corner, and a forest if we take a bit of a longer walk. It's still just Flanders, but we're grateful to be here, actually. Everything essential is within walking distance, and yet we don't hear cars constantly. The occasional dog, apparently. It's rather quiet. So we're really grateful to be living here, actually. Fortunately, it's not Brussels.
No, I wouldn't want to live there. But yeah, I mean, Flanders is very flat. We have no hills, and we certainly have no majestic mountains or anything. So you have to sort of, yeah.
Bologna does have more hills, right?
Yeah. You do have some nice... In the southern half of our country, you do have some nice landscapes. Like, when you go to Bouillon, where the castle is, where Sir Godfrey of Bouillon, the Crusader, used to live. That's a beautiful valley with a river, and a medieval castle, and it's a lovely place. But where we live, yeah. So we got a bunch of other questions from Peter Strandkorn, and this is the next one. Do you read your own stories for your kids, like The Will of the Woods, or maybe some other homemade stories you have made but not published? So do we?
Our sons are still small. Ronan is 6 and Liam is 3. So they haven't listened to our stories yet. Ronan has listened to a part of the Flemish version of The Will of the Woods, but quickly lost interest. And it's a very visual generation, I think. We did invent a lot of bedtime stories. I recall that we intended to write down, but then just forgot to do that, which is sad. And Ronan has invented his own fantasy setting called Illness Land.
Yeah, that's true.
Where people speak illness. And he makes up all kinds of ridiculous factoids about this setting, and we love that. And since he's starting to read, he reads us bedtime stories now too sometimes. The school shares these digital books with him too, often with beautiful illustrations, but Ronan just refuses to read them. He says they are not real books.
Books that they can hold and smell, that have illustrations in them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I understand. I completely understand.
Maybe we should just have a Flemish copy of the Will of the Woods, and then with illustrations, and then he can smell it, and maybe he wants to read it then. Peter Strandkronen also asked, "You seem to have a lot in common. Are you each other's best friends?"
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's it. That's the answer. We are each other's best friends.
Yeah, we do have a lot in common. In terms of nature, we're very much the same. But our nurture was different, I guess. We're both INFP, or mediators, if you know the 16 personality types. If you don't, just type 16personalities.com and you'll find the test. It's really fun to do. And apparently that personality type is very rare, and Tolkien was a mediator too, so we like that.
Yeah, that's nice. Nice to know.
And Domine and I also share the same astrological sign, Leo. However, I don't really believe in that kind of stuff. But it's nice that our birthdays are only a fortnight apart. Since we're both introverts, we naturally don't tend to have many friends or go out to parties or festivals. We share the same interests, so that's pretty awesome.
Do you happen to know what INFP stands for? I forgot. It was introverted and then something else. I think intuitive. Introverted, intuitive, and I don't know what the FP is.
I guess I can look it up.
Yeah, introverted, nerdy, fantasy person. Because that sounds about right.
So it says the INFP are introverted, intuitive, feeling, and prospecting personality traits.
Prospecting. Okay.
Don't know what they mean by that.
Like a gold digger in the 1800s California? Probably that.
Like a marketing dude?
Yeah. Okay. Peter's next question is, do you currently own, have you ever owned, or are you planning? That sounds like something a lawyer would ask in a witness. Do you currently own, have you ever owned, or are you planning to own any household pets?
I had a grey rabbit as a child and lots of hamsters. And I got a dog for my first communion, a cute poodle. He was my best friend. But he had to live with my grandmother when my sister was born. At university, I found a tame albino mouse that I put in my lunchbox and took home with me on the bus to keep as a pet. I named him Hamlet, and he was the best pet ever.
That's such a great name, by the way.
He was a bit crazy, so yeah, it was fitting too. And he was so smart. I actually managed to potty train him, or at least Matchbox train him. He had a divine... I really had a divine connection with that mouse. Like we could have had actual conversations or something.
Did the mouse speak?
No, he did not talk. But
because maybe it was a boy who had been turned into a mouse by the witches.
That's very well possible. He sniffed. Though he sniffed in a very significant way. It was like we had actual conversations. Guess it's clear why I don't have many actual friends now. I was the weird mouse lady. Hamlet only lived for 2 years, which is actually pretty long for a mouse, since I have no clue where he came from or how old he was when I found him. And I really mourned him. With Domine, I've had several mice, hamsters, gerbils, in different cages, since they couldn't stop procreating. And I guess as soon as we started procreating, though, we stopped having pets.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we had dogs, chickens, birds, fish, a lizard, a rabbit.
Lizard.
Yeah, I had a lizard. I even had a toad at one point,
What?
but that was just caught in the garden and we released it again. Because it looked so unhappy, I had to release it.
Aw.
Some turtles. With Arin, we've had mice. Yes, deliberately. We had a couple of gerbils, turtles,
Yep.
but currently
Hamsters.
nothing.
Oh, right. I forgot about the turtles. Yes, we did have turtles.
Yeah, and I remember as a kid, I also found a pigeon with a broken wing once.
And your dog didn't eat it?
No, that was not Igor. That was Goldo, and Goldo wasn't the.
He was a decent one.
And we nourished it back to health and then released it. So we had a pigeon for a while too.
Oh, wow. My grandfather had a lot of pigeons. And
Did
rabbits, too.
Did he use them in competitions and
No,
things
he
like
just
that?
kept them. He thought they were a nice company. So
Yeah, yes, yeah. Pigeons are interesting. So yeah, I do miss having pets, but currently it's just we just can't.
no, basically because it's so small here, so we don't
Yeah.
have the room for pets, but also because we have 2 small children and they are curious and they want to touch everything. And also, the pets take a lot of time.
Yeah, you want to be able to take care of them. You know, I mean, you have to do it well or not at all.
Especially with a dog, because I always wanted to have a dog. I'm a dog person, I admit it.
Yeah, me too.
And I always wanted a dog, but since we don't have a garden, it feels kind of silly because dogs should be able to run around, and
Yeah,
you shouldn't only take them out for an occasional walk, but they should also have the opportunity to just go out whenever they like.
yeah, I think so too.
So yeah, no pets for us for now. Domine is my pet. Pet.
I'm smiling now. Okay.
Okay, next question from Peter. I wouldn't have thought about it, but it's an interesting question. Do you feel the current inflation much in your country?
Well, they say when America sneezes, the world catches the cold. So yeah, we do feel it. Over here, it's especially been an energy crisis, but I think that's got more to do with the Ukraine-Russia situation. But yeah, there have been some extremely high gas bills. Luckily for us, we didn't get the worst of it, but I've heard of some people who really had, horrendous, insane gas bills.
Yeah, we do feel it. That's why there has been a bit more silence on socials and on Patreon during the COVID period. I temporarily took a part-time job for financial reasons, so we do have some savings now as a backup. But I did work a lot of extra hours in the past couple of months to get by. Sure, I'd rather write awesome stories, but I'm grateful I can write and do voiceover for a living, even if it's literally writing shitty blog posts for cesspool cleaning companies or writing about plumbing or different kinds of bricks. That's actually something I do.
I know. I'm your
You're
proofreader.
my proofreader.
I'm
Yeah.
your proofreader, so I learned quite a bit about about cesspools and. Okay, and then Scoticus gossage.
This is our last question.
Yeah.
11.
I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Scoticus gossage, or gossage. I don't know. But he's a YouTube follower, and he asked us the following: why did you include the discussion on theological differences between the Voronitzian edition and the current faith in the Witch Hunter novel? It reminds me of the split between Catholicism and Martin Luther. though with magic and the lead up to the Wars of Religion. It's interesting stuff. And on that note, where did the idea for the goddess, her daughter, and Lucus come from? I can see the Christian influence, but was there something that sparked its inception?
I guess it just kind of grew as a topic, right? But I'll let you handle this last question, as you actually wrote and produced Witch Hunter, where I think that theme is most prominent, right?
Yeah, that is really part of the main plot line in the original Witch Hunter. He's not the first to comment on this as some kind of and to see it in terms of a sort of a Catholic Protestant thing, but for me it never was that. That was never my intention. Although I can understand why, because the setting is kind of like the 16th century, I can see why people would think of it that way. But it's kind of funny because I never even thought of that while I was writing it. But I was always interested in religion, but I wasn't really religious when I came up with the Witch Hunter story back in 2007. Although I am Catholic now, so I'm more of a. Eileen and I were both, I guess you could say, reverts because we were raised Catholic. Although, it was.
I think more of it as converts because we were raised poorly.
We weren't really catechized very well. Most people aren't anymore.
We didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so we both drifted away. Eileen was an atheist for a while. I was more of kind of a new age guy. But yeah, through many hoops, we eventually found ourselves returning to Catholicism.
And we didn't know about it from each other.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting story.
Yeah,
in
itself.
In itself.
Yeah, it's really.
But
it was weird.
But yeah, I guess I just put all that stuff in it because it made for a dramatic twist. And it's a fantasy world, so you can do pretty much anything. It's not a comment on real world religion, and it's certainly not about Martin Luther. As for the goddess, she was actually supposed to be a deity that is not quite like the god of classical theism, but I think something a bit more mythological, something more akin to, a small g god, like the gods of Olympus, more of a pagan kind of god, but with, of course, similarities to the Christian or Abrahamic conception of God. But I made her a she simply because I wanted to make it a bit more distant from real world religion, to make it clear that this is fantasy. So, in case you were wondering, it is not because of feminism. It is not because I believe that God is female or anything. And as for the inspiration for the Lucas story, that actually comes more from the Silmarillion than the Bible. Although Tolkien himself, of course, being also a Catholic, was definitely inspired by the Bible. Did that answer the question?
I hope so. We cannot check it, but I guess we'll hear it. I think we've already gone way overboard with this, so it's about time we wrap this up. Our tea mugs are empty, and so are our minds. We want to thank all of you for listening, and those who sent us questions. Without you, this podcast would have been much more boring and definitely much shorter.
Yeah, I'll put in some sound effects of explosions during the more boring parts to make it more exciting. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.